Hi and welcome to another show. This is Brian Joyce, your state senator. I am coming to you from Fuller Village, a senior housing facility in Milton. A volunteer position that I hold is on the board of directors of this incredibly beautiful facility, and they're kind enough to host us, to allow us to host this program here, and so I figured I'd give them a little plug. Probably the happiest group of seniors I've seen living here at Milton Fuller Village. So this show, as those of you who've seen it before, is often designed to bring to your living rooms some of the policymakers, some of the persons that shape the decisions that we're making in state government. And today we have an excellent guest. We have a guy named Rick Sullivan. Rick serves as the Commissioner of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. For those of you who may recall the old MDC, the Metropolitan District Commission, that was essentially the state's parks department within the Route 128 belt. And then outside of 128, through the rest of the state, there was a Department of Environmental Management. Kind of some redundancy. And a couple of years ago, several years ago now, we combined those two into one Department of Conservation and Recreation. And during the time that I've served you as state senator, clearly this is the most competent person that has led that organization, which in many respects is the crown jewel of state government. So I'm delighted to welcome Rick Sullivan.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks for having us.
By way of background, Rick is from Westfield, which I've heard of. That's somewhere west of
it's a little bit west.
My district.
Exit 3 on the Mass Turnpike.
And you were former mayor, started in the school committee, so you know a little bit about politics. And how did you happen to be invited to join Governor Patrick's team as the DCR commissioner?
Well, I was in my 7th term as mayor of the city of Westfield, and got the call from the governor and said, would you be interested in serving in his cabinet under Secretary Bowles in the environmental agency as head of DCR? And quite honestly, Westfield does not have a lot of connections into DCR. We have one relatively small facility. So, sitting down, talking with the secretary and the governor, and checking out the website and seeing what the mission of DCR was. It was a challenge that I was honored to accept.
Well, you've risen to the challenge. So you say that Westfield didn't have much of the DCR in it. I'll tell you, my former Senate district was the district that comprised the largest share of the MDC of any in the state. And then when we did the redistricting, I moved out of Boston further south. I represent 10 communities in Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth counties. And it still includes an extraordinarily significant portion of the Blue Hills. The Blue Hills comprises about 22% of the land mass in Milton, for example, where we are now. Also a significant portion of Braintree and Randolph and Canton, communities I represent. We have the Neponset River, which flows throughout my district, and going down to Easton and Sharon, Borderland State Park becomes quite important. So I have a very significant DCR presence, and that's probably why I call you so much.
You are definitely one of the elected officials who is on the phone the most, whether it's issues at the Blue Hill or, quite frankly, driving the parkways and making calls into our regional manager here. Your voice is heard often.
You know, we were just joking about that before the TV show started, where I'll be driving down the Blue Hills Parkway, for example, at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and notice where trees are out, and give a call to Peter Church and leave a voicemail for him to make sure that tree is replaced. But I do take that seriously as part of my job to work cooperatively with the agencies. But let's talk about some of the big things that have gone on. One of the things that you and I have spent a lot of time on, and probably the most valuable lesson that I've learned in politics, is that change is hard. In that, I would have, I think, a longer career or easier career if I would just go along and get along and pat everyone on the back and say everything's hunky-dory. The reality is things aren't always hunky-dory, and particularly during these extraordinarily challenging economic times. Now, the economy's getting better, it's improving, but we have some significant challenges. It seems to me we have a fiduciary obligation to the taxpayers for whom we both work to make sure that they get the greatest value. And I give a couple of examples. the rinks. People are surprised to learn that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was actually the largest operator of rinks in the world. We had some 22 rinks, I think, under the MDC, and 18 or so under DEM. So we had about 40 rinks. They were losing money. They were poorly run. This is really before your tenure.
Right.
And the state was continuing to pour money into these rinks that were losing propositions. The assets were deteriorating. And someone came up with the idea a few years back, why don't we hire professional management, lease these facilities? And guess what? It turned out to be an extraordinarily good deal for the taxpayers. And under your watch, and even before your time, I worked very closely with the Inspector General to make sure that taxpayers' interests were protected. We included language to ensure that the kids did not pay any more for the ice time. It was still quite affordable, that there was money going back into the facility. So as a hockey parent, I'd go and suddenly the rink was clean, neat. You got a hot cup of coffee. The kids had a better ice sheet. And the taxpayers were making money, or at least not losing money. So here in Milton, I said, well, let's do the same thing with the Yulin rink. People went cuckoo. People went, opposition to change, any form of change. There's always somebody with a vested interest. Whether someone running the snack bar or someone afraid of what's going to happen to my kid's ice. I mean, understandably, people like the status quo. The status quo wasn't working. And so I think the resolution we have now, unfortunately, we couldn't get support in the other branch of the legislature to pass a 25-year lease that would have made the town, I think we had it calculated, you and I, a $12.5 million profit, or at least savings from the state. Made the town at least $2.5 million and improved this asset. How do you explain the resistance to change, and do you see this elsewhere? Was it more so here than elsewhere, or what?
Well, I've always said, for the years that I've been in government, if government by itself would just like to have nothing change, because there are vested interests in having no change, whether it's the workers at the rink or the people that just know the system. So change is always hard. Elected officials always get into trouble when they want to change something. Everybody says they want change, but usually not their own little piece.
No, let me just stop you right there, because that's spoken like a person that has spent time in politics. Everybody says they want change. And, I'm actually only 18 years old. I just look this old because I've pushed so much change, right?
That makes me 20.
but I have the scars in that every time. You mentioned the workers in the rink. Now, they were seasonal workers that in many instances weren't getting benefits. We were offering to have the rink open year-round. The employees would actually have a better deal, could have benefits, and twice as much ice for the kids. And yet, you're right, just that people say they want change, but if it's a change in their life, oh boy, they're against it. The good news is now we have, you have awarded the rink to the town for a 5-year period. Unfortunately, there won't be that great investment they would have gotten out of the 25 years, but that's okay. Baby steps. They'll see that, hey, this is a pretty good deal. And my goal here was to not only protect the taxpayers, but also protect the users and let the town participate. But I have this throughout my district. We worked in Canton to get the rink to them, and their youth hockey runs it well. And so, but the change, another example in Canton, the Ponkapog Golf Course. Now, we have this beautiful facility with designed by Donald Ross, and 36 holes that have been largely deteriorating over the past 50 or 60 years, I mean, predating your tenure. So when I come in as a state senator, it needed $2 or $3 million, I'm told, in repairs, and now I've heard estimates, $20, $30 million.
That's a lot.
And there are 3 holes closed, and sometimes more if it rains. We had an opportunity to bring in professional management, rehabilitate the course at no cost to the taxpayers, try to invite in the USGA to have a PGA type event, which is like a mini Olympics. Brings as much money to the regional economy as the licensing fees for these casinos that folks are looking for. Real good economic development, but again, there's folks that have a vested interest that are resistant to change, and it might be the fellow that has a discounted round of golf and wants to continue to have a discounted round of golf, but at what expense? The rest of the state subsidizing it or missing out on this opportunity. And there are, I try to tell people, like we did on the rinks that we did privatize, you can put in language that limits what can be charged so that the senior citizens and the kids still have discounted golf. But again, that change is coming about slowly. But I suspect as we now have scarcer and scarcer state dollars, and we have to make a choice between adequately funding our schools, our public safety, services for frail homebound elders, you know, more and more people are coming around to my way of thinking that, hey, we have to look at every single tax dollar and see if there is a better value that can be gleaned.
Well, I mean, I think you've been right on both of those issues. I mean, I think the experience on the DEM side, as you talked about earlier, with the state rinks and even the ones now that are on the former MDC side, you know, we've seen the investment, millions of dollars into those rink facilities that's been done by a private entity, or in some cases the community. The legislation that that you crafted, you know, does protect, you know, youth hockey is first and not-for-profits is second, and the hierarchy of when it can be rented.
And girls and boys, girls get equal access.
Obviously, everything is absolutely equal access. Those things are all protected, and it's in there. It's in the legislation. It is in all of those leases. Rates are protected. In order to up your rates, it has to be actually approved by the commissioner. And I can tell you this year there were some that we denied. But what we found is in the communities, they ended up with, you know, longer days of skating, a longer season of skating, you know, certainly a better facility because they have the capital investment.
The kids get a better facility, more ice time. Taxpayers no longer are subsidizing. They're actually, in some instances, making money, but at least the facilities are improving rather than wasting. It's a win-win-win, but it just shows the resistance to change, which I think is the #1 lesson. And everybody out there watching wants their government to be more efficient, more effective, and I'll tell you, I'm trying to do that. I really am. But there's always somebody with a vested interest, always. And you never, you know, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was over at Ponkapog and trying to calm the fears of some of the folks that work there who were in opposition to bringing in some professional management, and I mean, you know, folks that's what they specialize. I don't mean to disparage but just this is their, you know, they have the profit incentive to try to, you know, run a more cost-effective operation. They can expand and have functions there. For example, you can bring in new revenue with, you know, I don't know, hosting weddings or restaurant stuff. So the fellow who ran the golf carts, he was vehemently opposed to privatization. I said, well, what's your interest here? He goes, well, I run the golf carts. And I said, is that a private contract? He said, yes, I don't want to lose it. He already was privatized. He was just, again, God bless him, but just protecting his interest. So let's move on to a couple other things. We got some good stuff going on with the DCR in this district. One of the things I worked on quite a bit over the years, really since my first year, was opening up the majestic beauty of the Neponset River. And, you know, I grew up very close to the Neponset River, but you couldn't see it. It was covered. And, you know, we have the Charles River that everybody's familiar with. But we've, in recent years, in the last 10 or 15 years, I had former Speaker Finneran was in my district, and he and I were kind of on the Senate and House really pushing this funding where we'll have this multi-use path or bike path all the way from Castle Island in South Boston, all the way out to Big Blue here in the Blue Hills. And we're about 3/4 of the way there. We are. And, you know, again, there was extraordinary fear. Folks thought it was going to bring about crime and, you know, detract from the neighborhoods. In fact, what they've found is property values go up. It's been a good news story. And we've acquired land along the banks. And Mike Lynch over there, our crack cable guy right up by your grandfather's house, we acquired land and protected it. So we've had some wonderful things, and you have some further things we're working on for the Neponset.
We do on that multi-use trail. I mean, you've created miles of trails there that are already become popular, even though we haven't done the official grand opening. And I know the Martini Shell, it's a little geographically slightly outside your district, but we've been running free movies and programming out there, arts, and the crowds have been huge. All across our system this year, we're up about 20-25% in terms of visitorship and usership. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's program or just coming to the park for passive recreation. It is up all over. And we've committed, the governor did make this a priority urban park with your strong support. It's the
so for folks listening at home, we're talking about like Truman Parkway in Milton running into Hyde Park, that area, coming out of Mattapian.
Right, and then the last thing that was part of that urban legacy park project is the last piece that you kind of referenced, which will take it up over into Mattapan, and there's been a series of public meetings. One of the things that has really been a hallmark of the governor's administration and with your support is strong community involvement. So we've had a number of public meetings. There was some public walks that just took place. We've extended all the comment periods. I think you will see changes to even some of the proposals that were made.
Listen carefully now to my friends from, say, the
Capon Street,
Cliff Road, Burn Road. You're being heard. Trust me, you're being heard.
So again, you are on speed dial, and you are probably the most oft to email on my BlackBerry. So absolutely are heard. I think that there was a lot of good dialogue out on the last public walk. I know my planning staff came back, and they are going back and looking at some other alternatives that were not part of the presentation.
One of those alternatives was proffered by the former executive secretary in Milton, so-called Alternative F, I think it was, John Cronin, who lives here in Fuller Village. Hey, let's move on to a couple of other things too. It was funny, talk about the Blue Hills, then we should get to other parts of my district. But in the Blue Hills, people sometimes don't realize this, but GBH, WGBH, stands for Great Blue Hills. And when we were always scrambling for funding for things like the Trailside Museum, which I love and have adopted for the past dozen years or so, and now we're building a beautiful new ball field for the kids in Houghton's Pond. Beautiful. My kids will be a little bit too old to use it, but it'll be a beautiful recreational regional facility. I discovered that tower on the Blue Hills was a tower that WGBH was on. They had a dish, and they were subletting, but the state wasn't getting any money in it. We did a little digging and was able, is actually in your predecessor's tenure, to come up with a new source of revenue in that have these entities pay the rent that was due. And then I created something called the Blue Hills Reservation Trust so that we're able to keep all that money generated out of the Blue Hills, keep it in the Blue Hills so as to subsidize things like the Trailside and other hiking trails and the Houghton's Pond ball field and the like. How much pressure is, now this was an existing structure, but how much pressure is there on you as the steward of the state's, some of the most beautiful natural resources? There must be some pressure to look for alternate sources of revenue, commercialize these properties. And by and large, you've said no, and Governor Patrick has said no. Tell me about that balance. It
is a real balance, and I mean, we're stewards of some 450,000 acres in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We're the largest property owner in the Commonwealth on a government entity, and included in that is some of the highest peaks in the state when you get out to Mount Greylock. But certainly some of the highest peaks in the communities where we are, and obviously the Blue Hills is such a case. And when you're at the peaks, there is pressure. There's pressure for all kinds of communication towers, public safety towers, it doesn't matter, data, and it has been. And up till now, we have really resisted it strongly. And I think the governor has been firm in his administration in terms of purchasing conservation land, has pledged $50 million a year, the largest ever in the history of the Commonwealth, to land acquisitions for preservation of open space. So we have held to that. But to your point, where there have been existing towers, you did create the trust, and quite frankly, the Houghton ball fields, there's over $1 million that's being spent to those. I can tell you that there is not another place in the Commonwealth where that kind of money is being spent to totally renovate ball fields, and it's as a result of that model that was created. It's going to be a great facility.
So I hope that my friends in the Milton travel soccer and all the regional teams that use those ball fields, remember, we're the only ones that have gotten this new ball field, so keep it quiet.
Well, and the other one, we do have to say that was actually extended, because while we were out there, we added the irrigation, so now you're taking care of soccer and multi-use. So you're really taking care of everybody in that facility.
So my friends down in the Borderland State Park area have asked me, and they've been lobbying me, and I'll tell you, there's some extraordinarily good people that devote themselves to preserving natural resources like Borderland, or the Friends of the Blue Hills and the Friends of Borderland State Park. They had asked if they could have kind of the same model there. I guess there's now a parking fee at Borderland State Park, and they wondered why that couldn't be a kind of a revolving or retained revenue account, that they would be able to keep that money and have that go into the park.
Well, unless the laws change and allow for the revenues to be retained into a trust, such as the Blue Hills Trust, all of those dollars actually go into the general fund, and that's the way it goes by operational law.
So you probably wouldn't object to my changing that law?
I wouldn't, as long as, the retained revenues right now, we actually don't get to retain as DCR, we don't get to retain all the revenues that we bring in. I'm not saying it would be a break even, because it would not be, but we actually do turn money over to the general fund through those fees that you're talking about. But there have been moves afoot. Salisbury Beach has created a retained revenue. Hull at Nantasket has now created one. I know Representative Rodericks is talking about one down at Horseneck. So it is becoming a model that people like. That they don't mind paying a fee locally if it's going to stay in that facility.
Okay. Well, that's kind of a little bit of inside baseball, but I will just again say I think you're doing an outstanding job, and I know that I am persistent on behalf of the 160 or 70,000 people for whom I work, but by gosh, that's what they pay me for. Let me ask you a couple of, now this is where we come to the hard-hitting questions at the end, okay?
You can ask me my favorite color or anything.
No, I don't care what your favorite color is. Well, it's probably blue, because this is a blue state.
Green.
Green for the Irish. Okay. Do you like your job?
I do like my job.
What's your favorite part?
I have to say, I should probably say Hampden Ponds, because that's from Westfield. I have to say Castle Island. And the reason Castle Island is that when I got this job, quite honestly, I did not even know, any of the parks that DCR had. And when I was walking out to come to work, my mother had called and said, make sure you take care of Castle Island. And I said, Castle Island? She grew up in Arlington, and she remembers Castle Island was the place that her family, my grandfather worked in a meat packing facility. And that's where they used to go for their family vacations. They'd pack a picnic and they'd go over to Castle Island.
Okay, well, I got to say, I need your mother's number, because clearly the most important thing ought to be in my district. So your favorite part of the job, though, probably the least favorite's getting calls from legislators.
I totally respect. I mean, again, I've been in the business long enough to know that we've got 202 immediate constituents I got to answer every day, and then all the residents of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I like that part of the job. I think right now in this day and age, probably the budgets are the toughest. We did go through a layoff and an early retirement last year. We had 54 people take that. That represented 1,400 years of service. You don't kind of replace that. But I have to say that the support from the legislature, absolutely yourself included, and the governor and the secretary has been huge. And they really appreciate and support the mission of DCR.
Yeah, I actually would like to give the governor and the secretary, who, like you, works for the governor, their due for doing an extraordinary job, I think. An extraordinary job with the environmental agencies. The best I've seen on fewer dollars than their predecessors. Now, here is the most important question, so please answer it carefully, okay? The governor he fumbled this one a little bit. He finally got it. He caught it. Who's the I'd say, who's the most effective of the state senators that you've had the pleasure of working with?
You are absolutely the most
All
persistent.
right, Mike, we got that. We can end the show.
The loudest, and I think for the issues that I have, the most committed. So
right.
I thank you for
I'm teasing, so thank you very much.
All
I
right.
do mean it sincerely. What a great job you're doing. We're delighted. Thank you for coming, and sorry about that long commute back to Westfield you have
Not a
now in
problem.
rush hour, but so
Great.
thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. This is another episode of the Senator Brian A. Joyce Report. I was being a little facetious there in the end about myself, but I mean it sincerely that this guy, Rick Sullivan's done a great job as the steward of our precious natural resources. Just mentioned that the department is actually the largest landholder in the state. We've done in recent years a pretty good job actually adding rather than detracting from the public lands, and let's hope that continues for years to come, that he continues in his position. We'll see you next time with another important guest, and we'll learn a little bit more about state government and how it affects you. Thanks very much.